Good morning, everybody. How are we? Good? All right. So you've had two grown-up proper presentations. This is a bit of fun. I'm going to talk about emotion. I used to actually get into social. I can see a few faces that I recognize from times past. And it's interesting hearing a new generation getting into social. But one thing that was definitely true when it was before we're going to start pivoting into social messaging, which is really going private in essence. But when it was out there and everybody could see it, one thing was completely clear. Customers felt about their problem. And one of the interesting things about social, apart from the governance, apart from the fact that it freaks every single brand out to do something in public with your customers where there's an argument, the fact of the matter is you've also got to manage two levels these days. You've got to get the outcome, which can be difficult because often social is an extension of the empire. And in fact, it's often upstream that the problems occur to begin with, and you've got to do that in a sort of rapid kind of a way, in a way that is effective for the customer. And at the same time, you've also got to manage how they feel. Because, of course, in a public context, that can be quite viral, and that can spread. And indeed, if you look at the crisis thing, sometimes that's just triggered from a purely emotive situation at the end of the day, and that can grow in a very fast way. So I want to talk a little bit about emotive CX for customer interaction. It's not particular to social channels. It's part of an overall response. And it's something I've been doing for the last couple of years. I'm running some courses and bits and pieces. And the bits I want to talk to you today is kind of the fun part, really, about emotion and some of the latest thinking that's come out of neuroscience and some of the models that we have and the way that we think about emotion and, in fact, some of the latest thinking. So I hope you enjoy. So the first thing to be said, applicable in any particular context, and it's this. Although all of us in some degree are under the cosh in terms of productivity, which gets us to focus on average handle time and ticks in the box and all the rest of the stuff, the other thing to remember, of course, is from the customer's point of view, it was their particular gig. It was their particular interaction. It mattered to them at the end of the day. And it's important to understand from the point of view of effectiveness, there is no such thing as a neutral engagement. You've either added goodwill or you've subtracted goodwill at the end of the day. And if you're old enough to remember Blue Peter, remember it has been one of those appeals. You either put something onto the thermometer and you've got a little bit closer to the target, or you've taken a couple of points away. And what's interesting, if you think about that, is that we're in a very volatile situation. And one of the most fascinating things about working in customer engagement these days is that we're not any longer working on a continuum. We're actually working in an environment where you, as customers, are continuously seduced by the latest and the greatest disrupted experience. And you go, wow, that's great, fantastic. If they can do it, why can't you do it? And by the end of the year, those expectations have grown. And there's an arms race. Now, one interesting thing, by the way, is none of us, we're talking about insight as one of the key themes today. I would highly recommend that whatever platform you use, you try to extract from that a sense of where the customer expectation has gone year on year. Because trust me, another 12 months is going to be different. Whatever Deliveroo's done, Uber's not having a good time right now, but they kind of set a few expectations in their time. Everybody's setting a new expectation. So we have what, McKinsey said is the liquid expectation. So it's going to be better. Why aren't you there at the same time as well? And if you look at the people that keep the score, people like Nunwood, people like Forrester, actually the industry's flatlined for the last 3 years, which is interesting. Now, has CX got better? Yeah, without doubt. But we're getting to a point where it's more difficult to do that. Now, there's a whole number of potential reasons for it. One, I just sort of back up with what I've just said. I think that as we make progress internally, the customer, unfortunately, is accelerating faster than our ability to deliver. So we're flatlining. The other thing I think that sits in there is that with CX becoming a corporate discipline, we've forgotten really what experience means because we've had to reduce it to practice, to process. And, organizations kill anything that's alive in that sense. Right? So we've forgotten what the heck experience is all about. And the fact of the matter is, for a whole number of reasons, I think that the world we live in right now is a tense place to be. It's great that we can just see the houses just down the road there. You can look out that window. There's been a lot of shouting there recently. There's been a lot of shouting in the equivalent version in the States. People are very, very stressed, and there's not much listening, but there's a lot of shouting that's going down. And I think that puts us all on edge. And if you combine that with also the fact that we have higher expectations, we're all having a hissy fit. You know, we're walking away from brands in a way that we never walked away before. And the smallest of things will do us. And trust me, this is just one of loads and loads of data points that we've got right now, which says how many times can you actually reduce that goodwill in that customer before the relationship has snapped? Is it once? Is it twice? Is it 3 times? Who knows? It's getting less and less as the general drift of all the research. And by the way, the most important thing from your point of view is to say, do you know that yourself? Do you know that by different personas? How long is it before your customer said, enough is enough? And if you're doing that seriously and on trend, is that getting better or worse each year? And as you get to understand that dynamic of that behavior, then it suddenly puts a real premium upon the way that you deliver any form of customer engagement, because quite frankly, it might just be the thing that breaks the camel's back. And if you have a look at this piece of research, this is actually coal miner as it happens, but interestingly, they're sort of comparing emotion coming into a contact center experience and emotion at the end of it, and I haven't quite got time to unpick that, but trust me, there's a lot of negativity that starts at the end of the call, which is not transformed by the end of it. And one of the things that I've been working on with the team that we've been doing this work on is that very simple idea of peak-end rule. You know, the memory that we end up with on a particular interaction is the one that we take away. It's not actually what goes down necessarily in terms of the fullness of the experience, but it's the one that is retained. And the mind tends to, for a variety of reasons, remember the negative rather than the positive at the end of the day. So if you're leaving people in a negative space, that's the lens through which they will remember that experience. And trust me, it doesn't take a psychologist to tell you that if you feel bad about something, you want to do less of it. If you feel good about something, you want to do more of it. So therefore, building a positivity in terms of emotion towards you as a brand is investing in all those things that CX say is important commercially, i.e. I'll stick around, I'll buy more, I'm open to new offers, and I might even tell somebody else that you're great. You know? So, and by the way, if you just want the evidence of it, the Tenkan Research in Life that says if an experience can be broken down to the 3 components, and I think, by the way, if you have often wondered how to measure experience, I think this is excellent. Forrester do it, Temkin does it. There's 3 things that define experience. Outcome, you know, we focus on first-time resolution, don't we? Outcome absolutely matters. And by the way, if you don't get that right, forget the rest. But get outcome sorted. Effort absolutely matters these days, you know. We can't even do anything these days without it being easier and easier and easier. And the last thing is emotion. And interestingly, we've made some progress in the first 2 topics, but very little as far as the last is concerned. And what fascinated me is one of the motivators to get into this is that we're now in the season of Christmas adverts for retail, aren't we? I don't know how much they spend collectively, but it's got to be north of 50 million, isn't it, easily? And the whole of the high street is broke. And yet they still put that money in to connect to us emotionally every single Christmas, which is amazing. And we know that marketing has got emotion right from the beginnings of time, really. And yet we haven't really connected the dots in terms of service and gone, hey, do you think it's the same customer? Yeah, a little bit further down the life cycle, of course it is. So how would we be cognizant of the power of emotion in that particular context? And clearly, we're not very good. So, looking at it from a commercial perspective, and it's interesting, if you know, and you've ever seen Claire Sportin talk from Confirm It, she's been around the industry, and I saw her talk quite recently at the Customer Engage event, and she was interesting her perspective this year and saying, look, we're getting to a point where a lot of us have rebadged as CX. You know, it's interesting to look at LinkedIn profiles and how everyone suddenly flipped from what they were doing to having CX in their title. It's a very rapid personal development, which is all to be saluted. But she said, it's interesting that we're probably going to lose 1 in 4 people soon, simply because the CFO's going, hey, where's the money? Where's the deliverable? Everyone's collecting insight, great, but who's doing the do? Where's the ROI? And there's very little delivered. And, you know, soon CX is going to get replaced with another 2-letter acronym, AI. So get your skates on was her message. And I think it's an interesting point. So what is the ability to demonstrate that CX-orientated behaviours is worth anything apart from the church and the religion of. Yeah? And this is one way to look at it. You still have to build a formula, but the basic thing is to do with this. So, if you focus upon emotion, we clearly have a role in influencing the way that they feel. And that can be from everything to fabulous to not fabulous. So there's one part of the formula. As a result of which, they will then let us know, preferably sooner than later, whilst they're still in the experience, how they rate or how they evolve that. And let's not get into the theology of, is it CSAT, is it effort, is it NPS or whatever like that. And then the result of that is they're going to do something. Now, what is dead interesting is how uncommon that formula is as an operational model used and connected from finance through all operational teams. And if you don't do this, and this is a conversation about CX as much as emotive, you're not really playing at the end of the day. Yeah, most of us sort of probably stop at NPS and say, look, I've got an uptick. Great, so what? So what? There's a connection between that and then commercial behaviour. Or if there isn't, why are we doing it? And, more focus and more attention on that particular point. And then when you start to play the game, what gets to be very interesting is, of course, there is commercial benefit. So how about talking in these language? Do you know what? Joy leads to the shortest calls. We get through it quickly, it's cool. Guess what? Fear is most expensive. We spend more time with customers. And anger, lowest NPS. And it's not peculiar if you start to think about our behaviour as customers. Of course it's going to be like that. I'm always going to be asked to be transferred because I'm angry with you. I want to speak to somebody who can actually help me. Therefore, etc., etc. But what is interesting is you can then start to run your KPIs through a new lens, emotion. Wouldn't it be cool to work for a CEO who said, I want 3 more points on joy this year? Because he or she knows that translates back into a certain amount of growth. Wouldn't that be cool? We'd be living in a cool world when that had actually taken place. So that's just my kind of scene set around of it. And from my perspective, I got into it for 2 reasons. One, because of this flatlining stuff. And secondly, I've done a lot of work on AI and bots and all the rest of it. And, it's going to take some time. But the writing is clear on the wall. It's going to take away the low-hanging fruit. So if it does that, where do the people go? I don't buy to the idea that there won't be any people around, but I do buy the idea that they need to upskill themselves, and we can now focus simply upon the emotive, the complex, and when it matters to the relationship. And by the way, liberate the people who have been trapped in a really awful experience for the last 40 years dealing with low-hanging nonsense and being a dustpan and brush for the rest of the business. So, a bit of a fan of this particular point. So, in the middle of all of that, there is a kind of technique and a methodology in terms of the management of it and also the conversational flow. I haven't really got time to go through that with you. I'll talk later if you're interested. But what I am going to do is to talk to you about the education around of emotion and why people have emotion and how it works, just because it's kind of interesting and it's a part of a foundation capability. This work, by the way, comes from a lady called Lisa Feldman Barrett, who's written a wonderful book called The Secret Life of the Brain, How Emotions Are Made. And she's done a great job because if you read academic stuff, A, they don't do paragraphs, it's just continuous, isn't it? B, they spend most of the time referring to other people that's done stuff, so you've got to read tons before you get a new idea come through. And C, it's just bloody complicated. And she's done a great job making a book very, very engaging. And she's taken on a huge, huge argument, which I'll sort of touch on in a minute, but there is a prevailing mindset and sort of movement in the world that says emotion is a predetermined thing, triggered by an ancient part of our brain that always manifests in exactly the same way. And she's challenged that because the neuroscience, when she looks at it, says that is not the case. And one of the analogies that she gives to start her discussion up is, I think, an excellent story of imagine yourself as a brain, if you will. Day one on the job, your mission is to keep the person and yourself safe. The trouble you've got, though, is, of course, you're stuck inside of a box called a brain, a skull. You can't see anything. And so, therefore, your first thing is to try to connect to the outside world to understand what the heck's going on, because your mission is to keep that person safe. The brain's mission, survival, fight, flight, freeze. all of that kind of good stuff. And so we translate things like air pressure, light, chemicals into experiences called sight, sound, smell at the end of the day. And very quickly we lay down that in terms of experience and reference that experience all the time. All the time. And in really a remarkable way, if you think AI is cool, once you get this idea, you go, well, AI is going to have to do something quite extraordinary to even get half close to what's going on. And right now, right, you think what you're doing is just sitting in a room watching something. Your brain, though, effortlessly, outside of your conscious attention, because it would exhaust you if you had to do this consciously, you are working out what you are experiencing right now in real time, slightly ahead of events. And you're going through a cycle of predicting what's going down. And what you're doing is looking at this. You're using past experience of every other bloke you've ever seen sitting on a stage talking with a screen like that and something like that to try and predict what this reality is. And from which you will eventually determine, yeah, that's it. And then you generate that reality. For example, you've just done that. Didn't even try. And there isn't a box there, but you just generated that box. Your mind works incredibly quickly. Now, what's interesting in terms of reality generation and emotion being part of that, there is not, unfortunately, a special part of your brain that does loathing, fear, disgust, or anger. That's a very unoptimized way for your brain to work, because your brain is constantly generating reality and keeping yourself safe. It would be much, much better, by the way, for the brain to use whatever is disposable. You have, plus or minus, 86 billion neurons. Some of us who are a little older might have a little less than that, but most of us have got quite a few of them. And we constantly use cascades of those connecting together to simulate, predict, and generate reality at the end of the day, which is really an extraordinary thing. By the way, your brain consumes 30% of all the glucose that your food produces. It's a hog in terms of energy. So as soon as it has learnt something, it puts you into automation. Yeah? Did you remember getting up this morning? Did you remember having breakfast? Did you remember how you got here? Not a bit of it. You just came in on automatic. This is going to be the most exhausting part of your day. Consciously expending energy, listening to something new. Some of you already tuned out already and you're half listening, which is fine, because our attention is less than the goldfish. How we measure that, by the way, I have no idea, but it's a fascinating little titbit, isn't it? And that's one of the problems we have, by the way, in any form of customer service, is it all sounds like it used to. I've done millions of these. I'm simulating, predicting, and I'm going, do you know what? It's a complaint. It's another bloody one of them. Yeah, I ain't even turning up. I'm just approximately going through it. In a world, though, of personalized experience, that is an issue, because the personalization sits in the micro detail of how that person expresses themselves, the emotion and the feelings they bring to the table, and the impact you have being present and nuanced in your response to that at the end of the day. So your brain actually is a whole brain response to that. And there is no particular part of your brain where that is taking place at an emotional level. And unfortunately, it debunks one of my most favourite movies. Oh, let's just go back to that. There is, yes, not, unfortunately, a place where fear, happiness and sadness live. It's still a bloody good movie, all right? It's a great movie, and it's a great educational movie for kids particularly. I still love it to bits. But it's not actually what's going down. And the reason it's important is, well, for a whole number of reasons, actually. But if you take this is the Paul Ekman material. If you look at that, we're asked to believe that you can recognize an emotion by virtue of face. I mean, you can do it vocally, but this is the most common thing. Anyone remember the TV program Don't Lie to Me? Ring a bell? Okay. Well, there was one out there where there's a super-duper sleuth, and they can just basically tell from a facial expression what the emotion of the person is. This approach, for example, has been translated into a system that the American border control people bought for a couple of billion, because they're very worried about terrorists obviously coming into America. And so wouldn't it be nice to tell if somebody had a bit of a guilty look sitting in a queue coming into the States? and they were suckered into that. The trouble is, it doesn't scale in that particular kind of a way. And what's one person's smile is another person's something else at the end of the day. And it comes back down to something actually that if you go back to Darwin's days, he said a very important thing. We've got species like elephants, we've got giraffes, we've got stuff like that, but there is no such thing as an average elephant or giraffe. No such thing. And there is no such thing within the human thing called humans of an average human. You know that when you're treated in an average way. That's not on. You are you. In spite of Cambridge Analytica proving you're very similar to everyone else, that's another conversation. But you are you in terms of your own skin and the centre of your particular universe. And this is very, very important. And the notion, by the way, in AI, particularly emotive AI, is that your face with 140 odd muscles in it will always configure your face to display anger in exactly the same way. So everybody in the room, when we go angry, all looks the same, multiplied by the 7.5 billion on the planet. On that basis, guess what machine learning can do? Yeah. Now, that's very interesting, and all the emotive AI people are getting ready for, of course, the driverless car experience, where they've made a bloody huge assumption, which is you'll be more than happy to be micro-analysed in terms of you going to work. I mean, whether that's going to be the case or not, that's another argument. But the assumption sitting underneath of that is that emotions always work in a particular way. And the emerging view is that ain't it. The emerging view is, yes, there is commonality. You and I can recognise anger, but that's because it's a culturally specific thing. And you learn anger, you learn emotional response from your upbringing, the people that brought you up. And therefore there is a commonality in terms of that. And you mature in emotion. You know, a 6-year-old finds it impossible, more often than not, to distinguish between mad and sad, for example. Quite different. They just don't get the difference. And certain emotions kick in at certain ages. If you have teenagers right now, you will notice that they get excellent at disgust. They can show utter contempt to you. They practice on you a lot at that particular age, disgust. Yeah? It's a mature thing that we get into. And by the way, going back to the brain picture, in this context, it is a refinement of your ability to work out what's going on in the world, and it's a refinement of your response as well. Yeah? So it's part of your whole prediction cycle. You've got a very basic body kind of thing, I feel weird, but then an emotion is the sharpening of that pencil, the acuity that says it's about this particular thing. And I'll just show you the interesting thing around of emotion in terms of the fact that although it's common because we are all brought up, you know, in a certain culture to recognize them, it's also distinct across cultures. So if you were to go to Google and you were to go rainbow on a US or a UK site versus the Russian site, you would discover that from the Russian perspective, there isn't just one blue, there's two. And if you go back to the point I made to you earlier on about the way our brains process reality, and you look at light as it actually is, light is not what we are seeing. Light is a continuum of spectrums. And who's to say that how you divide that up? You know, the world is a construct of mental constructions. We need that. We need to go A, B, C, D. We need categories. And we need to have different colours within a rainbow. But how we actually arbitrarily do that is a basis of social agreement. As far as Russia's concerned, there's two blues. You know, you go talk to an artist and you say, can I have it in blue? They'll probably go, that's a really dumb question. What version? I've spent my life on blue. How many versions have I got? So literally, the deeper you look into reality, the more variation that you see. And you're going to work out, obviously, that the analogy applies to emotion too. And here's some fun stuff, by the way. I'm going to embarrass myself to a degree because I can't pronounce any of these words. So if you happen to who was our last speaker? Who was Greek? Anyway, pronounce that for me? I'll do it then if nobody else does, but please don't be rude on my pronunciations otherwise. Stenochoria, I think there's something like that. A feeling of doom, hopelessness, suffocation, and constriction. We've all had a bit of that, haven't we? But what's interesting is we, in the English language, haven't got a single word for it. They recognise that as part of their experience, they've captured a word as far as that's concerned. Here's a great one, Dutch. Anybody pronounce that? Gezellig, I think it is, something like that. And you know when you're chilling at home, comfortable, your guard is down, everything is fine, you're kind of with friends. There's a feeling and an atmosphere that goes with that. Yes? That's what it is. You never knew there was a word to describe that at the end of the day. Here's a great one, check. Torment over one's own misery combined with the desire for revenge. We've definitely had days when it's like that. Yeah? And by the way, interestingly, it is culturally specific. If you know any of your Czech history, sitting where they do in Europe, and you think about 1,000 years of, it's quite easy to have that as a mindset as a result of your neighbour's behaviour. This is fabulous. I can't even pronounce it, but it doesn't matter. It's when somebody has done you a favour that you didn't want from them, and which may have caused difficulty for you, but you're required to be grateful for anyway. Isn't that a brilliant description? And that's so Japanese, isn't it? That whole problem. And that's brilliant. There's a word for it. That's an emotion. And all of these illustrate the very simple point that, by the way, the common within culture, and this is, I mean, from an HSBC perspective, what's fascinating is the cultural diversity, of the emotional response at the end of the day. It's also diverse by generation at the end of the day. So if you get into emotion, as much as looking at the functional outcome, you've got diversity of expression as well at the end of the day. So the good news on this is, by the way, you don't have a bit of your brain that's just about disgust. It's pre-triggered like a fingerprint. You can do nothing about it. The emergent reality is that actually it is not a fabrication, but it is learnt, and you generate it, and it becomes a reality for yourself. Now, the interesting thing, therefore, is the broader your vocabulary, the more articulate you are at recognizing and being able to communicate at an emotional level. And for me, being in service means exactly that. You are in service to your customer. So it's on our side to help recognize a customer's emotional situation and to be able to articulate that. And that gets to be interesting at the front line because, again, trying to really deliver value in terms of the role as opposed to, it's a truck roll, let me just give you a form to fill in, engaging with real humans, helping them out on an emotional level, suddenly gets to be the job that they thought they were signing up for at the end of the day. And interestingly, by the way, if you get down into the neuroscience of the whole thing, isn't it magical that literally at a brain level, we've got total rapport going on? So, very quick summary of a discussion that normally takes 6 months to go through, by the way, is that, for me anyway, we have forgotten that emotion sits right in the heart of experience. We need to bring that back in again. I think that is one of the reasons why we're flatlining and we've forgotten it. Yeah, it's a stressful world as consumers we live in. Brands need to recognize that, not just for the Christmas video, but particularly when we come in. We don't phone call centres, we don't chat to call centres, we don't social to call centres as a validation, going, the day's great, I've just got to communicate with you. You don't do it. It's not a yo process, it's a yuck process. That means 9 times out of 10, I'm coming to you with a problem. You don't get a free falafel for guessing what space I'm in, positive or negative. Normally negative. Now what's interesting is, do we gloss over that or do we engage with that? What's also interesting is, do we keep it in a negative space and let people walk away and see the lens of that thing outcome through a negative perspective? Because we know that negative actually influences our decision much more than we like to imagine at the end of the day. So we have to become emotionally literate at the end of the day. And the last thing is that you cannot make it up and say, you were upset, I'm going to make you happy. That ain't going to happen. But you sure can take people to a better place by the end of an engagement and ground a more optimized experience as a result of that. And that's the new skill sitting at the front line. And if you take that, that starts to actually ripple right the way across many, many of the assumptions we have in terms of how we build customer service. What does a team leader do? How does a team leader support a team if that's the case? what does quality management start to look like? Are you on to the next call? Particularly if you've just taken people from a very hard place to a much better place. Maybe it's 10 minutes mindfulness to recover and recuperate. Maybe that's a more productive day at the end of the day. So it gets to be kind of interesting as a result of that. So if anyone's interested in that, come and have a chat. I've actually just taken a group through, people like sort of Atom Bank and British Gas and John Lewis and L&Q, a bunch of people like that, and we've just done a 6-month course. And what they're doing is building a POC. They're selecting the journeys, ones that are high emotion. They're mapping those journeys again in terms of what they think are the emotion components. They're then using feedback and analysis to verify where people are starting and where they want them to finish. And then there's training up the teams to be able to do that. And then they've got a continuous improvement cycle, and then et cetera, et cetera. And then they're trying to use that formula to see, have we nudged the dial at the end of the day? Got lots of written stuff about that. We've also got the opportunity to get engaged if you'd like to do that. But anyway, there's my little piece, which is on the importance of emotion in terms of what we do. The world we live in now isn't just about functional outcomes. It's got to include that emotive space. Marketing's known that. We should know that as far as service is concerned. Social is a place where often the customer has escalated a problem, and therefore we are in an emotive context. The skill, particularly in just 120 characters, or 240, hey what, to flip it is a high skill. It's interesting to consider whether or not that should be the new front line in terms of what our customers are expecting in a world where those expectations continue to grow. You've concentrated enough. I thank you for your attention.
I'm sure that's got your synapses firing. Do we have 1 or 2 questions for Martin before he moves on at all? Any in the room? One just at the back here. Wait for the microphone 1 moment, please.
Hi, Martin.
Hi.
You mentioned that a percentage of customers would leave a brand after one bad interaction.
Yep.
So I work for a housing association, L&Q, in fact, and so a lot of our customers don't have a choice of where they go. So how would you expect one of those customers to respond?
Great question. Well, first question that Ashley and the team at L&Q, who've just done the work with us, asked that question. And you reframe. So there's 2 components of that. Someone who's upset with you isn't a very collaborative person, generally speaking. So some of the benefits is to have people on side, and also to have people that are saying positive things within the community. Many, many housing associations have got some component of private housing and therefore purchase within it, and that certainly influences that group at the end of the day. But in reality, the metrics that Ashley and Kelly ended up with was primarily NPS and CSAT, and trying to improve that around the key topic of guess what? Repairs, which is the one that does everybody in housing. Does that help? Thank you.